Hey, this is Jeff, and you teach the machines. This is part 2. Still reading from the introduction. Our Black Swan Moment. On November 30th, 2022, a startup company called OpenAI released ChatGPT, an AI language tool that quickly gained widespread notoriety. The public reaction and significant notoriety of this tool in our consciousness was an outlier, impossible to predict beforehand. There was a huge impact from this notoriety, its release and subsequent freakout in almost every corner of our society changed our conversations and expectations in a very big way, whether we or not we actually took the time to play around with ChatGPT. Since that moment, we've been furiously working after the fact to explain how this all happened. We want to go back and figure out how we could have predicted how ChatGPT has upended our lives if we'd only paid attention. This trifecta of an outlier event with a huge impact we desperately try to explain afterward is characteristic of what's become known as a black swan moment. The black swan is a theory for understanding the outsized impact of rare events in human society. Events like the September 11th attacks and the subsequent political, public, and military response. It was highly improbable, but changed everything. A black swan event is also a matter of perspective. A number of expert analysts were not surprised by the attacks on September 11th. To them, an attack was certain, even if they did not know exactly when or where it would happen. The general public, the military, and much of the federal government not only did not anticipate the attacks, but were completely unprepared to handle such an improbable but consequential event. My goal in writing this book is to help you be informed so you may better handle the changes we can anticipate, especially the unlikely but consequential disruption AI is certain to cause. The more you know about AI, the more you use AI, the better off you will be in coping with unexpected events AI will bring in the future. Artificial intelligence depends on you. You teach the machines. Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, may or may not have predicted the public reaction to his launch and see what happens creative destruction. It's a typical path in the technology industry, both useful, gather new information, and intellectually lazy, skip the deliberation. Sam did it with his one and only startup before realizing investors, not entrepreneurs, made the big bucks. And he made enough money then investing to convince him he was a master of the universe. Except his only prior startup was a failed social network app called Looped. Lower stakes. He was successful enough as an investor, give him credit, to co-found OpenAI as a nonprofit artificial intelligence research organization that quickly evolved to have multiple for-profit subsidiaries. It's complicated. After launching ChatGPT, Sam Altman claimed the release was a benevolent attempt to help us all face the reality of the new power of AI. That may or may not have been a reason. More likely, it was to grab market share with a product built using an algorithm originally developed at Google and a few $billion he needed to show a return on. Meanwhile, people at Google, including Geoffrey Hinton, one of the originators of modern AI, were doing the more difficult, just because we can, should we? Deliberation. Carefully considering the implications of technology certain to cause major disruption. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what Sam claimed as his reason. The immediate impact on public discourse and industry was huge and will likely be viewed as historically significant. The black swan of AI bursting into our consciousness made us feel like the world shifted beneath us. Professionally, I found myself in the middle of a storm of uncertainty and fear. My colleagues at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and I were stunned that ChatGPT had been put into the wild. We were hit by this black swan and found ourselves in the role of helping people who hadn't seen it coming to process and understand what had happened. All of a sudden, much of my job became explaining the emergence of AI after the fact. Before ChatGPT, our society didn't know that AI was around the corner. Now we feel like we don't know what AI will bring, good or bad. The reality is that AI will almost certainly bring more black swan events in the future. But you also have more agency than you realize. You teach the machines. Why is it worth considering our reaction to AI in the black swan context? Step back from AI for a moment. The black swan way of thinking is useful because it's about admitting we don't know what we don't know. The black swan theory says that randomness is more prevalent than we as humans are wired to accept. Many, if not most, of the truly important events in our lives or our society are unpredictable. So maybe, just maybe, we should balance the amount of time we try to predict and plan with more time spent preparing for uncertainty and change. Please don't take this suggestion as a forecast for doom and gloom. We humans seem to be hardwired to see change and uncertainty as inherently bad, probably because we don't live very long, and have evolved to be almost entirely concerned with self-preservation and to see anything new as a threat first. The emergence of AI was jarring in the sensational way that it quickly went from tech company back office to dining room table conversation. We consider the idea of the black swan theory not so much because it explains the emergence of AI, but because it's a good way to prepare for the uncertainty that lies ahead. The certain to happen but impossible to predict unintended outcomes of AI. The black swan theory tells us it's up to us to work together to demand and take an active role in this change. So let's go back to the moment when ChatGPT burst onto the scene. Why did it seem like such a big deal? ChatGPT delivered to everyday users a compelling language-based conversation experience on just about any topic. Note the use of the word compelling instead of accurate or correct. This is an important point that we'll get back to. Over the next few months, social media, TV, and traditional media exploded with examples of ChatGPT answering questions, writing poems, drafting letters, and summarizing information. We were seeing a credible artificial general intelligence application for the first time. ChatGPT is one among many examples of a chatbot, a computer system taught to respond to text or voice. Chatbots had been mostly annoying and useless up until this point. Boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials remember Clippy? Most recent chatbots weren't much better. They were rarely welcome, mostly unhelpful interjections to already painful customer service experiences. If it seemed like every chatbot you interacted with before ChatGPT was narrow-minded and knew nothing of your specific problem, you're right. Chatbots prior to the current generation, or the previous generation, were not much more than a fancy search interface to whatever narrow catalog of information their owner wanted you to go through before passing you on to a more expensive human. What was different this time? The release of ChatGPT gave anyone who signed up for a free account an interface to incredibly powerful new language-based AI technology. Millions upon millions of people did just that and had their first experience with AI in a message-based conversational format that seemed to respond somewhat credibly on any topic. ChatGPT differed from our experience with Clippy and its chatbot descendants in part due to the many billions of dollars invested in its underlying brain, a type of AI known as a large language model that we'll learn more about later. Suffice it to say, ChatGPT could reply to you more authentically based on its having read hundreds of millions of publicly available texts multiple times. ChatGPT also used a new type of AI, more on this in just a bit, that was much better at figuring out the important words and phrases in your message to it. Prior chatbots were clumsier and not as insightful. People got super excited because ChatGPT seemed more responsive to what was important in their message. In a way, ChatGPT was the first chatbot that seemed like a good listener. And it could respond to questions on just about any topic because it had read just about everything on the internet. Did you know that ChatGPT was taught with the contents of every web page published all the way back to 2008? That includes, but is not limited to, every word written by copywriters in online clothing catalogs, every public website, and every online news article not behind a paywall. This was the closest we, the general public, had come to the artificial intelligence of popular science fiction. Amara's Law. ChatGPT was a big deal. It was creepily relatable, and everyone could access it. So we quickly worked ourselves into a frenzy. What does this witchcraft mean? Companies cynically jumped on our frenzy and slapped, "Now with AI!" all over their products, further whipping us up. But there's a great adage known as Amara's Law after scientist and futurist Roy Amara, who coined it. We tend to overestimate the effect of a particular technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. Let's go to an example. My grandmother was born in 1913 and lived to be over 100, passing away in 2014. She remembered her excitement at the first telephone installed in her house when she was a girl. But the Dick Tracy communication watch, popularized by the comic book character when my grandmother was in her 20s, didn't arrive until the advent of the voice-enabled smartwatch when she was in her 90s. The gizmo still didn't gain widespread use until Apple released the third version of their smartwatch the year my grandmother passed away. On the other hand, in her last decade, she was an avid internet user, the impact of which she couldn't have envisioned when she made her first telephone call or read Dick Tracy comics. Impact overestimated in the near term, Dick Tracy watch. Underestimated in the long term, internet. Is Amara's Law true for AI? Are we overestimating in the short term? Terminator, killer robots. And underestimating in the long run? Democratization of expertise, workforce disruption. Economists describe production as the result of a combination of land, natural resources, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. If you consider AI to be a form of automation, it certainly can be, then it will change the relationship between labor and the other factors. Does that mean AI will put writers out of work? Yes and no. I'm glad I'm writing this book and not brief descriptions of menswear in an online catalog. Generation of that kind of text is a layup for modern AI. The machine has been taught by the digitized text written by generations of copywriters who came before. AI is already making it harder, likely soon impossible, to make a living as a writer of new descriptive catalog copy. In that sense, the answer is yes. AI will put some writers out of work. On the other hand, AI is helping me by improving autocorrect and providing helpful suggestions on brevity, arguably making it less intimidating to sit here and write my first book. So in that sense, the answer is no, for me, for now. Let's take another look at how AI changes the relationship between labor and production. After a long day, I sometimes relax with a TV show called How It's Made. Each episode is a compendium of narrated video shorts documenting the making of things. Think hockey stick manufacturing, snack food production, and lumber milling. A narrator voices soothing descriptions of the worker and the machine acting in concert to mass-produce wooden hockey sticks or stamp out cheese crackers from dough. Generally, the worker does less frequent tasks like dumping ingredients for cheese crackers into a giant mechanical mixer. The machine does the high-frequency repetitive tasks like rolling dough, stamping out crackers, and packaging, while industrious music plays at a low volume in the background. In one memorable episode on milling dimensional lumber like 2x4s out of raw logs, the worker is a saw operator. The machine is a computer system that's been taught to look at the end of each log to determine the ideal cutting pattern to get the most valuable lumber with the least number of cuts. A camera feeds the machine an image of the end of the log. The machine calculates and projects a grid-like pattern of laser lights on the end of the log to show the worker where to cut. The worker lines up the saw according to the machine-generated cut pattern, and the saw buzzes through the log. After each cut, the machine adjusts the laser light pattern to indicate the next cut. The worker flicks joysticks and taps pedals at high speed to move the log and the saw blade to match the laser projected cut of the machine. It is mesmerizing, a melding of worker and saw, much more compelling than the spell checker that saved me from spelling laser with an S as laser with a Z. In these cases, AI affects how land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship combine to produce books and lumber. In both cases, labor for the most part loses out, while capital and entrepreneurship win. This is the age-old story of increased productivity driven by automation. But consider the difference between the two anecdotes. The AI-enabled automation of cut planning or mechanical production is familiar. A previous, slower manual manufacturing step, lumber cut planning, performed by expert sawyers, was in part taken over by a faster machine, allowing one saw operator to produce many more logs, almost certainly putting saw operators out of work. But the automation of intellectual skills, like editing, copywriting, and revising for brevity, that's new. Those jobs have never been under threat. The capability of modern AI to perform tasks that previously required human cognition threatens entirely new sectors of labor. We're going to delve deeply into this later on, but for now, consider these examples and Amara's Law as context for the rest of the book. Stay tuned, we'll do it again.